In the hush before dawn, when the world still clung to its last fragments of sleep, a small medieval village rested beneath a canopy of fading stars. The air was cool and damp, touched by the scent of wet earth and distant wood smoke. It was a time before roosters stirred, before bread ovens roared to life, before footsteps marked paths in the dew-covered ground. It was a time when the village itself seemed to exhale slowly, stretching in silence, preparing for the weight of another day. The stone cottages, arranged like an afterthought around a central well, seemed carved from the earth itself. They bore the moss of decades, the scars of storms, the weight of time. No one spoke, no one stirred, but the day was already beginning. Inside one such home, an ember blinked within the hearth. Faint and patient, a man knelt before it, gently coaxing it back to life with thin sticks and practiced breath. The fire responded with a soft crackle, a whisper of orange light, the first heartbeat of the day. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. Around him, the walls bore the warmth of many winters, and each creak of timber sounded like an old friend waking. His wife stirred beneath thick blankets, her breath fogging faintly in the cold air. A child turned over in the loft above, murmuring into the stillness. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded. The fire grew. Beyond their door, a narrow stream wound along the edge of the village, tracing smooth stones with icy fingers. Mist hung low, clinging to fence posts and weaving between the hooves of sheep still huddled together for warmth. The pasture stretched pale under a silver sky. A single bird stirred in the hedgerow but held its song. Even nature, it seemed, was reluctant to break the spell. A woman, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, stepped softly down a path of flattened grass. She carried a wooden bucket and dipped it gently into the well, drawing water with the grace of someone who had done so since girlhood. She paused, watching the ripple fade. Inside the village bakery, a figure moved. The baker, already white with flour, worked in near darkness, his hands shaped dough by memory, not sight, folding and turning with the rhythm of someone who no longer thought, but simply did. The dough was heavy with the promise of sustenance, of comfort. Behind him, the oven crackled low, warming slowly. The smell of yeast began to bloom, threading through the cool air. It would be some time before the loaves were ready, but already the kitchen felt alive, like a breathing thing. Elsewhere, a barn door creaked open. A boy emerged, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. He carried hay for the animals, his small boots crunching softly over frost-bitten earth. Inside, the oxen shifted, their breath rising in plumes. The boy whispered to them, not words, but sounds, a habit more than a language. He had learned that animals appreciated quiet, too. The village was full of these tiny rituals, gentle actions performed with reverence for morning. The sun had not yet shown its face, but the light had begun to change. A faint blue threaded into the edges of the sky. The stars receded, the mist swirled like a shawl being shrugged off the shoulders of the earth. Another chimney coughed up smoke. A door opened. A rooster finally crowed, once, as if to test the hour. Then again, louder, certain. It was not a jarring sound. Here, even the crow of a rooster felt like part of the ritual. Curtains moved, shapes stirred, life returned without commotion, like breath returning after a long pause. Women stoked fires, warmed milk, roused children gently. Men stepped into booths, stretched their backs, nodded to one another without speaking. There were no shouts, no barking dogs, only the rhythm of waking. A broom swept softly across stone. A ladle stirred something warm. A stool scraped the floor. These were the sounds of history, unwritten, unnoticed, but essential. No historian recorded how quietly the world could begin again. And amid it all, the village remained itself, humble, slow, wrapped in fog and the labor of ordinary hands. No kings would visit, no battles would be fought here. But in this quiet morning, something sacred stirred, not in churches, but in kitchens, not in parchment, but in bread dough. History did not always arrive with trumpets and swords. Sometimes, it came with the steam of warm water, the scent of ash and rye, the hush of soft voices beginning a new day. Not far from the edge of the village, an old shepherd sat on a flat stone, his cloak wrapped tightly against the cold. He was not in a rush to begin anything. His sheep still lay drowsy, scattered in the mist. He looked not at them, but at the sky, gauging the color of morning, as if it were an omen written in gradients of gray and blue. His hands, scarred and calloused, rested on his knees. There was no need to speak. The language of animals and land did not require words. Farther down a winding lane, a young girl stepped outside with a basket pressed against her hip. She moved lightly, mindful of each footstep, not to wake those still dreaming inside. Her chore was simple: gather herbs from the small garden behind their home. But even this was a ritual she approached with reverence. She paused at the threshold, breathing in the damp air, scanning for sprigs of rosemary, thyme, and mint still holding last night's chill on their leaves. With careful fingers, she plucked only what she needed and no more. The village well stood in the center of the square like a quiet sentinel. Its stone rim was wet with dew, and the wooden bucket sat perfectly still. Soon, feet would gather there, voices would mingle, and gossip would pass like wind through wheat. But for now, it was silent. The silence was not hollow, it was full, saturated with potential. It held the weight of everything that had not yet happened, everything about to unfold. Back near the bakery, the scent of rising dough was beginning to drift farther. It wove into the woolen shawls of those walking by. It clung to the mist. It became the first true sign that day had arrived. The baker opened his shutters slightly, letting in a little of the dim light, and leaned out just enough to feel the air. He smiled, not broadly, just a curl at the edge of his mouth, and turned back to his loaves. He hummed a low tune as he worked, a tune with no words and no beginning, just as old as the walls around him. A priest passed quietly between homes, robes brushing softly against the stone walls. He offered no sermon, no greeting. His presence alone was enough. He moved as if in meditation, the hem of his cloak gathering drops of dew. His destination was not the chapel, but the stables. One of the oxen there had grown sick, and though he could not heal it, he believed in the power of being present. Sometimes, that was enough. He placed a hand on the ox's broad head and closed his eyes. The ox breathed slowly, and the priest whispered a blessing that only the animal could hear. Near the edge of the woods, a woodcutter emerged with an axe resting across his shoulders. He stopped to survey the line of trees, not with the eyes of a man seeking conquest, but with the respect of one who asked permission before taking. His boots pressed softly into the moss. He chose one tree, old but leaning. Its time come. Before the first swing, he whispered something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a promise, and then struck. The sound rang once, then vanished into the forest like a ripple. As the sun finally crested the hills, golden light poured over the village in gentle waves. Rooftops shimmered, chimney smoke caught the glow and turned copper. The last of the stars faded, shadows pulled back like retreating tide, and all across the village, people lifted their faces, not in awe, but in familiarity. This was not a miracle. It was life. Ordinary, quiet, continuous, and in this beginning, there was no proclamation, no declaration of history, but this, too, would become history, not the kind etched into stone or inked into scrolls, but the kind woven into memory, passed down in stories whispered beside fires, in gestures repeated without knowing why. The morning was no longer new, but it had not yet aged. The village moved now with steady rhythm. Fires burned steady, loaves cooled on wooden racks, children laughed, dogs stretched and yawned, water was drawn, tasks began. But even as motion replaced stillness, the feeling of that quiet hour, the hush before it all began, lingered. And in that lingering hush, something beautiful was preserved, a moment without urgency, a time without noise, a space where the world was not demanding, but gentle, where waking was not abrupt, but sacred. That was the morning, and that was enough. In the earliest stretch of morning, when the village was still caught between sleep and wakefulness, the hearth became the first to stir, long before carts rolled through the lanes or boots struck stone paths. Warmth bloomed in the quiet corners of kitchens. In one such cottage nestled at the southern bend of the village, a faint orange glow pulsed from the center of a large hearth. As if the stones themselves remembered how to breathe fire, the baker had already risen. He did not need an alarm. His body had long since aligned itself with the rhythm of dough and flame. He moved through the kitchen with deliberate grace, neither hurried nor hesitant. In the quiet, every sound mattered. The soft creak of the wooden beams above him, the gentle thud of his heel against packed earth, the rustle of flour sacks. Each noise was a small announcement that morning had indeed returned. His breath left his body in steady clouds, not from exhaustion, but from presence. A long wooden table occupied the center of the kitchen. Its surface bore scars from decades of use, knife marks, scorched patches, pale rings left by hot pans. It was both an altar and a tool, where meals were shaped and families sustained. Upon it sat two large bowls, their contents covered by linen. He reached for the nearer one first, peeling back the cloth like uncovering a secret. Inside, the dough had risen beautifully, puffed, smooth, and fragrant with the quiet promise of nourishment. His hands knew what to do. He didn't have to think about folding or shaping or kneading. The motions were stitched into his muscles like lullabies passed from father to son. With every press, the dough exhaled a soft sigh of air, a living thing tamed by touch. The flour floated up into the slanted light, catching like dust in a chapel, turning the whole room golden. He worked without words, accompanied only by the hiss of the fire, the rhythm of his breath, and the occasional creak of the house settling around him. Outside, the mist still curled along the ground, reluctant to lift, but here, inside, time was already in motion. His daughter, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, padded in quietly, her feet wrapped in thick socks. She knew better than to speak. Instead, she brought water from the bucket, stirred embers with a poker, and fetched a cloth for the rising loaves. Her movements were small acts of devotion, silent offerings to the morning. The baker glanced up once, met her eyes, and nodded. It was more than enough. The oven, a large dome of brick and clay, had been warming slowly for hours. Its fire was not rushed. The baker had learned that flames, like people, could be temperamental. They needed attention but not aggression. When the coals glowed a deep crimson and the walls radiated heat, he knew it was time. The first round of loaves, plump and obedient, were slid onto wooden peels, dusted lightly, then ushered into the mouth of the oven. As the door closed, the room shifted. Anticipation took the place of preparation. The scent came first, faint at the edges, then fuller, deeper, comforting. It was the smell of crust forming, of yeast awakening, of generations repeating themselves. The daughter sat cross-legged by the fire, cradling a cup of warm milk between her hands. She watched her father work not with curiosity but with familiarity. This was not novelty, it was inheritance. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. Though still slow, still tentative, a shutter opened, a broom swept a doorstep, a kettle began to hum. In another home across the lane, an elderly couple prepared their own fire. The man struggled slightly with the flint, and his wife laid a steady hand on his arm. No words were exchanged. When the flame caught, they sat side by side, backs slightly hunched, faces lit from below. They were not thinking of history or legacy. They were thinking of tea and bread and the quiet joy of still having one another in the same room. On the same morning, meanwhile, the baker tended to the oven. He watched the color of the crusts change, listened for the subtle shift in sound when a loaf was almost ready, the shift from soft breathing to a firmer crackle. He tapped one lightly with his knuckle and smiled at the hollow tone it gave. Done. One by one, the loaves came out, lined neatly on racks, steaming, fragrant, alive. He brushed them gently, not to clean, but to greet them. His daughter rose and began wrapping a few loaves in linen, readying them for delivery. Some would go to the church, others to homes where age had taken strength but not appetite. They would be left by doors, accompanied by a knock or, sometimes, just by trust. Payment came later, sometimes in coin, sometimes in cheese, sometimes in small favors remembered and returned. No one kept a ledger. The village kept itself. The baker wiped his hands and leaned momentarily against the doorway, his arms crossed, his eyes on the horizon. The mist had lifted slightly. Birds were beginning to call. He could hear the soft roll of a cartwheel somewhere down the road, the clink of metal from the smithy, the echo of a distant voice calling a name. The village was awake, and yet, he remained still, not from fatigue but from fulfillment. His part had been played. He had given the morning its shape. Bread was more than food here. It was rhythm. It was memory. It was love in a form that could be held and broken and shared. Behind him, the fire crackled softly, a gentle applause to the morning's quiet labor. He turned, picked up a loaf still warm to the touch, and broke it in two. The steam rose like a whispered prayer. He handed one half to his daughter, who took it without hesitation. Together, they stood in the soft light, eating silently, listening not just with ears but with hearts. Outside, the bells began to chime, not urgently, not sharply, but with the slow, measured cadence of a village that knew time not by the minute but by the moment. The hearth had done its work. The day had begun, and in the warm cradle of flower and flame, history had once again been made, not with triumphs or tragedies, but with touch, with care, with bread. The first true breath of the day exhaled from the village with a rhythm slow and unforced, as if the entire world were unfolding in time with a well-worn melody. Sunlight crept between thatched roofs and into narrow alleys where puddles from the night's mist still held pieces of sky. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the faint perfume of damp grass and smoke curling from chimneys, weaving together a portrait of life quietly waking. From the tallest chimney to the shallowest puddle, everything shimmered with dew and invitation. Footsteps began to multiply along the main path, a road not paved but worn smooth by repetition. Wooden carts creaked softly, pulled by donkeys that moved with the patient wisdom of creatures who had known this route every day of their lives. Iron-rimmed wheels turned slowly over stone, never rushed. A merchant arranged bolts of fabric on a stall he had built with his own hands, cloth draping like slow waterfalls over rough wood. His fingers moved with precision, brushing away imagined dust, aligning the corners as if royalty might come inspect them. To him, each crease was a statement of pride. Children, their hair still tangled with sleep, emerged from doorways barefoot. They spoke in half laughter, half whispers, as though the stillness of early morning required permission to break. One carried a carved stick he called a sword. Another held a doll missing one eye. They did not need toys that were whole. Imagination patched what time had worn. As they darted through the square, dodging baskets and barrels, their footsteps tapped a playful counter-rhythm to the village's quiet song. Sometimes a child would pause beside the bakery window, watching the baker dust loaves, pressing a hand to the warm glass just to feel the heart of morning. By the well, women gathered, not in haste, but in habit. Buckets lowered and rose with steady cadence. Water splashed onto wrists and sleeves. Conversations flowed just as naturally, soft updates, shared dreams, complaints about aching backs or goats too clever for their own good. One woman spoke of her sister's new baby. Another asked for herbs to ease a cough. The circle tightened and shifted like a school of fish, breaking apart only to reform in new constellations. No voices rose, no stories demanded center stage, yet every voice was heard. Even in disagreement, there was warmth. Further down the lane, the blacksmith's forge began to hum. He moved with the strength of routine, arms marked by soot and muscle memory, Sparks danced like fireflies as hammer met iron. The ring of metal on metal echoing not with harshness, but familiarity. Tools were shaped, horseshoes refined, hinges bent into form. Each strike carried with it the weight of necessity. The continuity of work passed down through unspoken apprenticeship. He did not look up when people passed. He did not need to. His greetings came through the consistency of his rhythm. Nearby, the priest moved from home to home, not to preach but to check, to listen, to be. He carried no scrolls, only presence, a hand on a shoulder, a moment by a window, a whispered name offered in prayer without fanfare. In one house, he sat with a boy who had not spoken in 3 days. They sat without words, watching sunbeams stretch across a wooden floor. In another, he helped sweep ash from a hearth, and the widow there cried, not because of grief, but because she remembered how it felt to be seen. He left behind no sermons, only steadiness. The seamstress, needle in hand, set up her chair by the open door, using the light while it was still gentle. Her fingers moved swiftly, guiding thread through fabric with such grace that it might have been song. Children occasionally ran past her steps, and she would pause long enough to remind them to mind their feet. A cat slept nearby, one ear flicking occasionally but otherwise undisturbed. The rhythm of her stitching matched the tempo of the bells that chimed faintly in the distance. Her work, like the work of so many, existed between breaths. In the fields beyond, labor had already begun. Men and women moved in slow lines, pulling weeds, checking soil, brushing fingers along stalks to guess how many days until harvest. Chickens scattered, cows flicked tails lazily, and a dog bounded in joyful larks. From the hill above, the village looked like a moving painting, figures alive with purpose, yet unhurried, every gesture curved by care. A boy guided a mule in circles, grinding grain beside his grandfather who explained the sky without pointing, merely glancing upward as if the clouds told stories directly to his eyes. A teacher sat cross-legged in a shaded clearing, calling softly to a group of children to gather. They came not because they were forced, but because they were curious. She began not with a lesson, but with a story. One about a storm long ago that had split a tree near the old mill. The story was not about fear or loss, but about how the tree continued to grow, two trunks leaning into each other for balance. The children listened, some chewing stalks of grass, some tracing shapes in the dirt, their young minds drawing wisdom from parable more easily than from instruction. As the sun reached its apex, light spilled across the stone facades and wooden shutters with the confidence of full day. Shadows no longer stretched, they crouched, modest and brief. Meals were shared on doorsteps, soup ladled into clay bowls, bread broken with hands still stained from soil. The village did not pause for lunch, it eased into it. Conversations slowed, movements softened, a lull, not of sleep, but of digestion in presence. Children returned to porches to nap, and elders leaned against doorframes sipping broth while listening to the shifting wind. Old men gathered beneath a tree whose branches had grown heavy with age and shade. They spoke of weather, of birds, of the strange shape of clouds. They passed a flask between them, not for the drink, but for the ritual. One laughed, a wheezing, bright laugh, and the others joined in, not at the joke but at the sound of it. Nearby, two girls balanced barefoot along a low stone wall, arms spread wide, giggling with every wobble. A mother watched from afar, not interfering, but storing the moment as memory. Somewhere, a bell rang again, not to signal anything urgent, but as a reminder. The day still moved. A boy chased a chicken. A dog chased the boy. A grandmother scolded neither. A baby cried. A lute was tuned. A sheet was hung to dry and caught the breeze like a sail. Every detail belonged. Every small moment stitched itself into the village's tapestry. Quiet but essential. The blacksmith paused for water. The seamstress tied off her thread. The baker handed a heel of bread to a passing child. And all of it was part of the same choreography. And in the middle of it all, Unnoticed by most, was a feeling, not pride, not joy, not even peace, but something simpler: belonging. It clung to the stones, to the walls, to the breaths shared over bread. It lived in the rituals too small to record, in the gestures that never made it into song, in the pauses between words. It was the pulse of the village, a mother wiping dirt from a cheek, a glance exchanged across a market stall, the hush before someone laughs, the sigh after a long breath, the ways people returned, again and again, to what they knew. By the time the sun began its slow descent, the rhythm of the day had settled into something steady and satisfying. Children's laughter grew softer, tools were returned to their places, baskets emptied, doors creaked closed but not locked. The village, once in motion, now moved toward stillness again, not with finality, but with the promise of returning. A candle was lit, not to chase away dark, but to welcome the quiet. This was not a place built by kings or remembered in maps. No great battle had been fought here, but in the soft coordination of ordinary lives, in the harmony of footsteps and firewood, of bread and bell. History had rooted itself quietly. It asked for no witness. It needed no applause, but it endured, and it mattered. And so the village moved, slow, sure, human, and that, too, was enough.
As the sun tilted westward and the afternoon softened into golden hush, a hush of worn hands and content bellies, there was a tree that stood slightly apart from the rest of the village. Neither tallest nor oldest, it bore no plaque, no tale of conquest, yet everyone knew it by name. Though it had none, they simply called it the tree, rooted at the edge of a gentle slope overlooking the thatched roofs and winding paths below. It had watched the village grow like a patient elder. Beneath its spreading canopy, generations had found something elusive in profound stillness. Its bark bore the grooves of generations, carved not by knives but by touch. Children had once climbed its branches, shouting imaginary battles to the open sky. Lovers had leaned into its trunk, their fingers tracing rings like stories in motion. Elders came here when their bones grew weary but their minds refused stillness. Beneath its branches, time did not pause, but it folded, allowing reflection to unfurl with no need for rush or structure. Today, under the ember light, a man sat with his back against the tree, legs extended, palms resting on the ground. His name was Tomas, a cooper by trade, but this afternoon, he was just a man seeking stillness. Around him the world moved slowly. Far off, someone hammered, closer still, children argued over a game of stones. But here, under the layered hush of leaf and memory, Tomas heard only his own breath. He tilted his head back and looked upward. The branches formed a web, fragile yet enduring, like the bonds that held the village together. He had helped repair the mill wheel, had taught his son how to sand wood smooth, had once delivered barrels in exchange for stories and soup. He was not known beyond the borders of the fields, but within them, he mattered. Under this tree, such a truth felt enough. A breeze tugged at the edges of his tunic and lifted the hem of his thought. He remembered his mother sitting where he now did, singing lullabies too soft to carry far, but powerful enough to root deep. He remembered a storm, years ago, that had cracked one of the branches. The village had come together the next morning, tying it gently, as if healing a limb. The branch survived, it still bore leaves. Nearby, a girl named Alina sat cross-legged, sketching into the soil with a stick. She came most afternoons, though she was quiet, 12, perhaps 13, with a curiosity that unfolded in quiet questions and watchful eyes. She didn't speak to Tomas, but she glanced at him once, acknowledging his presence like one might a deer or a stream. Something meant to be there, but not disturbed. A trio of boys approached soon after, carrying a ball of rags they kicked between them. When the ball bounced beneath the tree, one of them darted to fetch it and stopped short. Noticing Tomas, he hesitated, then nodded. Tomas returned the nod. The boy retrieved the ball carefully, mindful of the quiet. and ran back to his gain. Even the young had learned that beneath this tree, one behaved differently. It was not a rule. No one had written it. But the tree taught without voice. It taught with patience. It taught by simply standing and letting life gather under its shade. On a bench nearby, old Marta adjusted her shawl. She came every day, weather permitting, to knit beside the tree. Her needles clicked rhythmically, hands remembering movements her mind no longer needed to command. Occasionally she hummed, never loudly. Today, she paused and looked out at the valley below, where fields rolled like breathing cloth. "We used to harvest by hand," she said aloud, not to anyone in particular. "Took a whole day just to clear one patch." She smiled, not with nostalgia, but with recognition. Tomas didn't reply. He didn't need to. Her voice joined the sounds of rustling leaves, of distant hammering, of life continuing. The afternoon wore on. Light dappled the ground, making gold of the dust. One by one, others came, some to sit, others to stand briefly. A mother rested with her infant asleep against her chest. A boy with a scraped knee leaned against the roots. An apprentice brought a basket of tools and paused for a sip of water. No one stayed long, but no one passed without acknowledging the tree. It was not marked on any map. No guide pointed to it, but it was as central to the village as the well or the square. It bore witness without judgment. The carpenter came near sunset. He carried a small stool he had made the day before and placed it gently at the base. Then he sat. He did not speak, but he reached into his pouch and pulled out a piece of bread. He broke it in half, then half again, and placed a bit near the trunk. As if offering thanks, he ate slowly, not because he was alone, but because he knew he wasn't. As twilight drew nearer, the tree seemed to draw breath. Its branches lifted slightly in the evening breeze. The light turned rose-colored. Shadows grew long. Firelight flickered from windows in the village below. Tomas stood and brushed dust from his hands. He looked once more at the tree, then up at the sky now brushed with stars. He did not speak. He did not need to. The reflection had done its work. He left the spot without turning back. Others would come. They always did. And the tree would remain, watching, listening, holding time not in its bark, but in the silence it inspired. That evening, as twilight stretched its quiet fingers across the fields, more people arrived. They did not come together, yet they formed a kind of silent procession. A girl brought a wooden flute and played only a few notes, long, soft tones that melted into the leaves. A farmer in his late years brought a whetstone and quietly honed a blade. Not because it was dull, but because the motion comforted him. A young couple arrived hand in hand and said nothing at all. They leaned against each other, eyes forward, hearts slower. The light now turned to silver. Crickets began their chorus in the grass. The heat of the day had faded, replaced by a coolness that encouraged shawls and close conversation. A small lantern was placed at the base of the tree, not to illuminate, but to honor. Its flicker joined the dance of fireflies that had begun to gather like quiet witnesses. Some villagers sat in silence. Others shared stories in low voices, careful not to disturb the tree's hush. These were not stories meant for history, but for kin, tales of lost rings, first steps, forgotten jokes that still made someone laugh. Alina, the quiet girl who often came to draw in the dirt, returned later that night. She carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth, a folded page, a dried flower, a button once lost by her grandfather. She dug a small hole near one of the roots and buried her treasures carefully. Then, using her fingers, she smoothed the earth and whispered something into it. Not a wish, not a prayer, just a word, maybe a name, maybe a memory. Marta had returned too, this time accompanied by her eldest son. He supported her gently, helping her onto the bench. She leaned into his shoulder, her hands resting in her lap. "Do you remember when your father carved our initials into that branch?" she asked. Her son nodded. He had been 5 at the time. The mark was gone now, lost to the growth of the tree. But the moment remained, stronger than ink. "That was the summer we danced under the stars," she added, her eyes misting. Nearby, the village teacher had arrived with parchment and a quill. She had begun recording observations, not facts, but feelings, descriptions of what the light looked like through the branches, of the way silence settled like dust. She knew it was futile to capture such things on paper, but she wrote anyway, because trying mattered. Tomas returned, too, though he stayed farther back. He leaned against a post fence, arms folded, simply watching. He had no words left, but he had presence, and in this space, that was all anyone needed. The tree held them all, not in its limbs, but in its spirit. It was not a shrine. It was not sacred in the holy sense, but it was beloved. It made space for grief, for hope, for laughter. It allowed the villagers to pause and remember they were part of something, of soil, of sky, of each other. As night deepened, stars unfolded like lanterns of their own. The moon crept up behind the tree, casting its shadow long and silver across the grass. No one moved quickly. Time had loosened. People left slowly, with nods and backward glances. They did not say goodbye. They said, in their quiet way, "Until next time." When the last visitor had gone, the tree remained exactly as it had been, still, strong, listening. Just as the lantern's flame began to gutter low, a soft voice rose beneath the branches. An elder named Eric, long retired from the fields, had come late. His cane tapped slowly on the stones as he walked. The others made space, not from obligation, but from habit. He was known for his long silences and his longer stories. But tonight, he did not speak immediately. He sat down slowly at the base of the tree, resting his back against the bark, and closed his eyes. When he did speak, it was to the air more than to the people. "This tree," he said, "was once no taller than a child. I remember when its shadow fit within a single footprint." His voice cracked like dry parchment. "Yet it carried. My brother and I planted it. We were boys. We thought we might forget it. But it never forgot us." A hush fell deeper. Even the breeze seemed to pause. "I returned from the war," he continued, "a different man. My mother did not recognize my step. My hands shook when I tried to lift a cup. So I came here. I sat. I breathed. The tree said nothing, but it never asked me to explain." Someone nearby sniffed softly. A child reached for her father's hand. The lantern glowed steady. "Now," Eric whispered, "I forget many things, but I remember the way the light moves through these branches. I remember my wife dancing here, in bare feet, long before she was mine. I remember my daughters sleeping beside the roots, with a fever, and waking well." He placed a palm flat against the ground. "The tree remembers, too." The moment lingered. Eric said nothing more. He simply leaned back, eyes half closed, and let the hush hold him. And as the stars multiplied overhead, the tree stood not taller, but truer. It had become a living record, not of events, but of presence, of return, of quiet trust in the things that do not change quickly. The night deepened. People left in twos and threes, and still the tree stood. The wind shifted, and the village slept. Part 5: Evening Rituals and Rest. As twilight surrendered fully to night and the sky became a soft canvas of ink and ash, the village folded itself into ritual. These were not rituals spoken aloud or dictated by any law. They were learned through repetition, passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor, woven into the fabric of existence as instinctively as breath. Each home, each hearth, each heart knew the rhythm by which day was laid to rest. Smoke still trailed lazily from chimneys, though the fires now burned lower, more for comfort than for cooking. The scent of wood smoke, mingled with faint rosemary and fading heat, drifted gently through the streets. From one cottage, the soft scrape of a spoon against the bottom of a clay pot could be heard. In another, a mother rinsed out a cloth diaper by lantern light, her hands moving without need for sight. Candles were lit, one by one, not to banish the dark, but to soften it. The light they gave off was tender, flickering like memories held just at the edge of recollection. Shadows moved along stone walls not as threats, but as dancers in slow ceremony. Even the youngest children, still thick with laughter, began to slow their steps, their voices quieter, as if their bodies understood what time of day had come without being told. The baker, having long since cleaned his tools and stacked his trays, now sat at his table with a mug of warm milk. His hands, so strong in the morning, now rested palms down, open, at peace. Across from him, his daughter dozed with her head against the tabletop, the rise and fall of her breath in time with the tick of a distant clock. He did not move her. This moment, too, was part of the ritual. In the house of the seamstress, fabric had been folded and thread tucked away. She stood before a window, brushing her hair with long, even strokes, each pass of the comb a meditation. Her cat, which had been her companion through seasons of both joy and grief, curled near the foot of her bed, already dreaming. The woman paused once, looking out at the silhouettes of rooftops beneath the moon. She whispered good night, not to anyone, but to everything. Further down the lane, the blacksmith set aside a final nail. His forge had gone cold, but he ran a cloth over his tools with care, as if thanking them for another day of usefulness. He rubbed a scar on his forearm, a mark from a long-ago accident, and smiled at its familiarity. In the stillness of his shop, he poured a small cup of cider and drank it slowly, savoring the transition from doing to being. The priest knelt beside a simple altar. There were no grand icons, no choir, only a candle, a stone, and a piece of bread. He did not ask for anything. He gave thanks, for the child who laughed again, for the widow who sang, for the silence beneath the tree. His prayer was not in words, but in presence. Outside, the lanes grew quiet, doors closed not with finality, but with comfort. The last echoes of footsteps softened. The night was no longer a thing to push against. It was a cradle. It wrapped the village not in silence, but in hush. The difference subtle, but profound. Elders sat at the ends of beds, telling stories that needed no moral. Children curled beneath quilts patched by hands long since past. The firelight flickered across walls that had seen decades, and the floorboards creaked not from wear, but from remembering. The bell did not ring. It never did at night. It was a village that trusted its own rhythm, and in that trust, there was peace. On the edge of the village, beneath a sky heavy with stars, a man named Elias walked slowly, lantern in hand. He was not patrolling, he was not guarding, he was simply being the last to turn in, making sure the wells were capped, the goats penned, the doors drawn, not because he feared what might come, but because he honored what had been. At each door, he paused. Sometimes he touched the frame. Sometimes he whispered a name. When he reached the tree, he stopped. The lantern hung from a low branch, casting an ember glow across the roots. He stood a long time, listening. Then he sat, just briefly, and let out a long, full breath, the kind of breath that closed a chapter. He returned home just as the moon crested above the hill. His wife met him at the door. No words, just a hand on his arm. They moved inside together, and the door shut behind them with the softest of clicks. In every house, rituals were concluding. Some drank tea from chipped mugs. Some rubbed oil into tired hands. Some read from worn books whose pages barely held together. Others said nothing at all, letting the evening speak for them. In one cottage, a girl wrote in a journal, the tip of her pen scratching gently like a cricket in the stillness. In another, a boy lay awake, counting the stars he could see through the window and wondering if they counted him in return. And so the village settled, not all at once, but gently, like a river easing into its bank, like a blanket finding its shape over a resting body. The candles burned lower, the fires dimmed, the breathing deepened, and in the hush, there was something holy, not in doctrine or decree, but in the sacredness of repetition. of shared silence, of endings that felt like beginnings. The night took the village in its arms, and the village, trusting as ever, let go. And yet, even in rest, the world did not stop. In one cottage near the orchard, a woman sat by her spinning wheel, her fingers moving in circles long after others had gone to bed. She said it calmed her thoughts, the hum of the wheel like a lullaby for the soul. In another, a young boy with a curious mind flipped through a tattered book on herbs and roots, tracing each drawing with reverence. He dreamed of being a healer someday. A grandmother near the edge of the woods finished her prayers by lighting 3 candles, one for the past, one for the present, and one for the future. She believed the flames kept time in harmony. And nearby, an old man stirred from sleep just long enough to stoke the embers, add a log, and whisper a name from long ago, perhaps a friend, perhaps a love. Then he lay back down, his breath falling into rhythm once more. Far above, an owl moved silently through the branches, watching, not guarding, not hunting, simply watching. The village was not his concern, but it was part of his world, as he was part of theirs. Beneath him, foxes tiptoed between sheds and chicken coops, careful, cautious, never causing trouble unless hunger pressed. They knew these lanes too. The land slept too, in its way. The soil held the memory of footsteps and harvests, of laughter and weight. The fences leaned gently into the dark. Tools left outside rustled faintly in the wind. The wheat fields swayed even in stillness, dreaming perhaps of rain. Time passed without ceremony. No one announced midnight, but in its own quiet way. The hour turned, and with it, another page in the book of the village was written, not with ink, but with warmth, and wood smoke, and breath. And somewhere in the silence, someone stirred, just briefly, rolled over, and smiled. The hush held, and the night endured. Conclusion. A lullaby for the listening heart. And now, as all candles have dwindled and even the last footstep has faded into the hush, you find yourself at the edge of waking and sleep. Let the breath of this village settle gently into your chest, like a quilt drawn slowly up beneath your chin. There is no more to be done. The ovens are cold, the water rests still in its bucket. The hands that toiled have found rest, and so may yours. Let your mind wander now through the paths of the day just past, not to remember what you must do, but to let go of what you already have. Picture the baker's gentle breath over rising dough, the quiet pause of the priest by candlelight, the seamstress brushing her hair to the rhythm of a lullaby no one taught her. Yet everyone knows, these are not scenes from a distant past, but echoes that still hum beneath the skin of now. Even now, someone turns in bed and reaches for warmth. Even now, a fire somewhere has dwindled to its last glowing ember, holding on not out of duty, but out of grace. Even now, the owl watches, the tree breathes, the night listens. And even now, your heartbeat joins them, a quiet drum within a larger song.
The world outside your walls may stir with distant worries, but in this moment, you are beyond its reach. For here, in this village shaped from story and soot and starshine, you are held, not by hands, but by rhythm, by memory, by belonging. The roads of the village may not lead anywhere grand, but they all end somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. You are not alone. You are among people who speak in glances and rest in understanding, who rise with the sun not to conquer, but to care, who end each day not with applause, but with presence. Let your breath slow, inhale gently, like the morning mist curling over the pastures, exhale like the last note of a lullaby, trailing into stillness. Feel the earth beneath you, not the weight of it, but the gift. Let the soil cradle you, the way it cradled the feet of those who walked slowly, who lived fully, who rested well. And if, in your dreams, you walk again down the lanes of this village, past the well, past the window where candlelight flickers, past the tree where time gathers its thoughts, know that you are welcome. Always, let sleep arrive as it always does, not like a wave crashing, but like a fog settling over calm water. Let it wrap you in softness. Let it remind you that you do not need to strive, not now, not here. This day is complete, this breath is enough, this moment belongs only to peace. Good night, dear listener. Rest in warmth, rest in story, rest in the quiet that waits. With open arms, beneath the tree, sleep well, you are home.